Let's talk about the harmonizing, the final subtype for INTJs. We've talked about the dominant. We've talked about the creative. We've talked about the normalizing. Now, what does the harmonizing INTJ subtype look like?
Okay, so this is a very interesting subtype with an already interesting type. And so to describe a harmonizing INTJ almost requires an explanation of their brain wiring. Unlike the other subtypes where you can talk about their character traits and their characteristics, and this is not uncommon when you get to the harmonizing subtypes of most of the types, they're so particular and peculiar to the individual that it's easier to understand based on how their brain is wired than specific traits that come up for them.
Yeah, and we've seen the scans. It's really interesting to see some of the brain scans Dario's shown us on the EEG, because there's some, not things missing, but they're just things aren't connecting in the same way. They're more specialized.
Exactly. So there are still some characteristics though. So these INTJs are the most eccentric and eclectic of their type. They're also the most values or principle based of the INTJs and the most out there. Okay. So they're going to be just a little, when I mentioned iconoclastic before, now times it by 10. All right. These are people who are very peculiar to their own brain wiring. They live out their unique philosophy and desires. And if you look at Linda Barron's vernacular, they have a more behind the scenes quality. Observant and driven, yet also tolerant and not pushing themselves onto other people. So here's where I get a little technical. Their brains rely on one or more diamond-shaped networks that bridge the hemispheres. So each network that there are these diamond-shaped networks. Each network includes 4 to 6 diverse brain regions that work in concert. These multiple networks tend to not overlap. Each does its own thing and represents a different mode, and each mode fits a different kind of situation or way of thinking or being. Each mode includes a diverse set of skills that link and harmonize a thematic set of values, behavior, speech, perception, feeling, analysis, and so on. The reason why this is really important is that if an INTJ, a harmonizing INTJ, enters a situation that they lack a mode for, their behavior is usually odd or non-reactive, almost like they don't know what to do about it because it doesn't fit in one of these diamond-shaped patterns that are highly specialized. That said, they can connect all of these diamond-shaped patterns with a starburst effect. So that brainstorming capacity, you can cross-pollinate these specialties. But if something falls outside of the specialties, the INTJ is just not 100% sure what to do about that. So they just kind of get non-reactive, or maybe possibly even if their younger versions melt down. But this is the limitation of the harmonizing INTJ, while at the same time they usually have a lot of sophistication. So you're trading out the capacity to deal with general things to be highly specialized and very sophisticated in the specialties. They also have no halo effect. So I haven't really talked about this with all the other types, but a halo effect is almost like it's like the outside or ring around your brain lights up for very normal things. And it's called the halo effect. It means you're basically generally socialized. It gives you a capacity to deal with the normal things that life throws at you. And INTJs that are harmonizing almost have an anti-halo effect, like no ring shows up. It's as if typical forms of linear thinking are actively excluded. So unlike the normalizing INTJ that's very linear in their thinking, the harmonizing INTJ really struggles with linear thought unless it falls into one of these diamond-shaped networks. So if they're specialized in it, they're fine. If they're not specialized in it, they really struggle to do kind of almost basic stuff.
Yeah, let's talk briefly before we go into some more of the topical stuff. Let's go ahead and talk about the attunement of the functions, because I have a pattern that I'm picking up on here, or a comment I want to make. So let's talk about, again, driver, dominant, introverted intuition, perspectives, co-pilot, auxiliary of extroverted thinking, effectiveness, information gathering, decision making. How are these functions attuned for the harmonizing INTJ?
So this is opposite of the dominant, and therefore both of the functions are holistic. That means they're both receptive, both diffused energy, both kind of a more slow, even-keeled vibe.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad we anchored that, because I want to make a distinction here, because I think something was forming in my head a little bit that I just I kind of separated out. Analytic doesn't mean specialized, and specialized doesn't mean analytic. In fact, holistic framed cognitive function can be very specialized. Analytic is about more of the intentionality, the energy movement, or the intentionality of the focus than it is about the special brain patterns that are being formed in the brain. Mm-hmm. So again, it's more of what you're doing rather than how you're wired. And so I think that distinction is important, because I was starting to think in terms of, maybe analytic is a little bit more, because we talk about the analytic extroverted thinking effectiveness process being analytic for the normalizing. So I'm like, they're very specialized. They know what they like. They know what they think. They know how things go. They've got all these templates in place. So they're specialized in their brain. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means they have intentionality toward those things. It doesn't mean that that is how their brain is wired.
Yeah, actually, it might be the opposite. A more holistic, introverted intuition might be a little bit more specialized.
Yeah.
As opposed to the massive creativity of the holistic or the analytic version that you see in the creative INTJ, which is all over the place.
Yeah.
So there might be some of there. We could even talk about that and kind of dive a little further down into that. That said, going back to these INTJs, the harmonizing, unlike some other harmonizing subtypes, these INTJs still have a strong drive to complete goals. So not every harmonizing subtype is driven, but these INTJs are. So that's also what makes them unique amongst the harmonizing subtypes.
From other types.
From other types that are harmonizing.
The other 15 types that are harmonizing might be different. The INTJ is very specific in that they are driven, even if they're harmonizing.
Yep. And forming and pursuing tasks in service of their goals takes little effort.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit more driven. They have a little bit more executive capacity than maybe some of the other harmonizing types. But staying open, whereas other harmonizing subtypes are usually pretty good at staying open, these INTJ harmonizers can sometimes struggle to stay open because their brain wiring is already so complex. So it's a hyper complexity of thoughts that doesn't leave a lot of space for
interoperability.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost kind of like they're odd ducks because they think in this hyper specialized way. And when new information comes in, now they have to figure out how to put it into these already overly complex ways of thinking. So these harmonizing INTJs, like most of the harmonizing subtypes, they're usually older, right? They have had time to create these special diamond-shaped patterns. They're usually at least in their 40s and 50s, if not older. And this is just a direction they went. They just figured some stuff out and they kind of doubled down on it. And this is now how they think. And they're not always, unlike the normalizing INTJs that are very socialized and sociable, these are the INTJs that might really struggle to be casually sociable. They might have figured out, and part of their diamond-shaped structure is how to socialize, right? Like they might have figured some of those pieces out. And so they have like a way of interacting in different social situations. But if they run into one that they haven't already figured out, that might be a moment when they shut down.
Okay, let's talk about some of the careers that might be patterns of this subtype.
So again, this is not a complete list, but these are the kinds of careers that might help a person move into a harmonizing role. Independent researcher, philosophy professor, social or political activist, ethical hacker, experimental artist, inventor, sustainability consultant, nonprofit founder or director, futurist, alternative medicine practitioner, independent filmmaker, author or novelist, astrobiologist, think tank analyst, or cultural anthropologist.
Yeah. A lot of humanities, a lot of empathy type careers, helping other people. Notice some of those careers also are one-to-one careers where you're dealing with one person at a time in a certain like clinical way or just consulting with somebody.
Or all by yourself.
By yourself, yeah.
Right, yeah, like analyzing things all by yourself, figuring out a whole bunch of stuff completely alone.
Yeah.
And that's, again, for the quadrant of harmonizing, right? Because if you think of these as like 4 different quadrants, they're unusual even within that quadrant from other types that share harmonizing preferences.
My guess, and also observable pattern based on us working with different personality types, ISFPs, INFPs, INFJs could be misreads. Like you might type out, and there's maybe others as well, But I could see this subtype, the harmonizing INTJ, typing out maybe like as an INFJ, for example, that shamanistic kind of like empathy, looking more like a feeler than a thinker.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, we talked about the creative INTJ benefiting from a platform, like something like YouTube where you can plug yourself into, or Uber, or something that can give you both support and container. With the harmonizing, one of the things that we've seen with clients is a harmonizing subtype having another person helping to put them forward, market them, if you will, showcase their talent. Because if the harmonizing subtype is kind of recluse and has a specialty, sometimes the interoperability isn't there for the world to see that specialty. And so another person that can champion you, and if you're this subtype, say, look, person over here, harmonizing subtype INTJ, man, they've got some really great things to offer in this empathetic frame, or this coach or this consulting frame, or whatever, bringing forward. So maybe you're not looking as much for a platform as you are looking for people that you can connect with, both to nurture yourself, but also to help put yourself out there. They can be champions for you and can be the vocal piece to get you in front of the people that need to benefit from the skills you bring.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of INTJ is going to be taking a meta perspective as much as humanly possible. So mundane considerations can be a little more challenging. Again, it depends on what modes that they have picked up. So it's so hard to talk about characteristics of this type because it kind of depends on the thing they decided to specialize in.
Yeah.
That said, because they're taking such a meta perspective most of the time, it's harder to do the more mundane things. And so having a network of people who have got your back and help you out through all of that, I think is a smart play.
Yeah. The neurotransmitter of choice is estrogen.